going to go ahead and shift over to our next presenter. We have Dr. Eva Woodward here. She is a clinical health psychologist. She uses implementation science in practice, community engaged research, and mixed methods to improve equitable healthcare delivery for groups experiencing disparities. She's a career development awardee, clinician, and researcher through the Veterans Health Administration, and a faculty member at UAMS. And I've heard her present once. I've heard wonderful things about you, Eva. I just wanted to just from multiple folks. I heard wonderful things. So I look forward to the content that you'll provide us with today. We've had a great day, and I know that your presentation will add value to what we've already discussed today. So I'll turn it over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. Thank you for that generous introduction. Definitely, I've got some content, but I've also got some experiences. So we're going to do some things. I am calling to you from my home in Little Rock. And as Dr. Holmes said, I am appointed both at the VA in North Little Rock. I work 1 day as a clinician in primary care and then 4 days as a scientist studying how do we get good healthcare, how do we get good practices and good treatments actually implemented, actually used, and especially how do we get them used equitably so that people have equal access to them, the quality is what it should be for each person, and that their outcomes of the treatment are ideal and optimal. And I'm just thrilled to be with other like-minded psychologists today, or psychology people. So let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay, I think I need to swap these. Is that right?
We do see your
is this
slide.
better?
That's right.
Okay, that's the right thing. So today I'll talk with you about cultural humility as an essential stance to me for inclusive and functional work. If you are in the Twitterverse, I heard one of our previous presenters says you can follow along with me at Eva Woodward, PhD. Okay, and big thank you for being here today. You know, you're taking time out of your duties to learn and continue growing, and that's the most humble thing of all. Thank you to Dr. Holmes and the ARPA conference organizers. And a disclaimer is that nothing in here necessarily reflects the views of the US government. Okay, so first I just kind of want to get a sense of who is actually here with us today. And we'll start kind of with geography where you are. So I'm going to ask you in a moment to use a function on Zoom that I'm going to teach you how to use first. Okay, so you're going to annotate something. So in just a moment, I'm going to put a map of Arkansas up, and I like you at the top. If you kind of hover your mouse at the top, you will see this bar drop down. It'll have the little pencil that says annotate. You'll click on that, and then you'll go to the stamp, and you can see you can choose a heart, a star, a check mark, and you will mark where you are calling in from today. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so where are you physically located? Who is here? Who is here? Okay, so hover at the top. You should see the little bar drop down, and there's a little pencil that says annotate. And then you can click on stamp, and you pick an X or a question mark, any symbol you want. I'm going to see if I can do this too. And I just put my little self right there. If you're on a phone, this might be difficult, but on a computer, it's possible. Oh, thank you. Dr. Holmes in the chat saying most folks are in Central Arkansas, not seeing the symbols. Okay, thank you so much. Well, do you see any way to draw? Oh, nobody's seeing it. Okay, well, okay, let's pivot then. Let's pivot. It's possible that the two of us could annotate because we have some kind of host view here. Would you mind putting in the chat where you are calling in from today? we've got Little Rock, my colleague, Dr. Tisha Dean. Okay, yeah, so a lot of Central Arkansas folks, great. Oh, yeah, Pine Bluff, wonderful. Monticello. And Sherwood, wonderful. Okay. This is great. Just kind of helps me and us to kind of place each other and actually kind of place where we are. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So the learning objectives, oops, I have to clear that. The learning objectives of the talk today, I'm saving time from I'm still trying to get you out of here at 3:30, so I'm going to skip these because they're written down and you saw them before. So our workshop today will kind of be focused on considering cultural humility as an approach to more culturally conscious work, no matter what work that is for you or what work looks like for you. So one thing, I'm going to stop sharing and reshare to make sure this video is going to work for you. I'm going to let the people who coined the term cultural humility, two physicians in the 90s, go ahead and do that for us. So this is about a 3-minute video. Dr. Turvalon and Murray Garcia.
Drinking warm water before bed fixes tooth and gum problems overnight. People are healing.
All right. Okay, Dr. Holmes, can you tell me, are you hearing that okay? That ad?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right, here we go.
Love, actually. If I had to encapsulate cultural humility, or the whole concepts of cultural humility, it doesn't do it justice, but the word that I think of it is essence.
Escuchar.
Being. You.
Opening.
Receive. Compassion.
Love.
The principles of cultural humility offer one more framework to contribute to what has got to be our ultimate goal, yes? Our ultimate goal is that there will be a sense of equity, a sense of equality, and a kind of respect that we are driving forward.
Cultural humility is a multi-dimensional concept, and certainly Melanie Turvalon and I conceptualized 3 dimensions.
The first is lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. And in that critical self-reflection, it is the understanding of how each of us, every single one of us, is a complicated, multi-dimensional human being. Each of us comes with our own histories and stories, our heritage, our point of view. You're looking at me now. I am very fair-skinned. When I was a little girl, my hair was blonde. My eyes are blue. People often tried to call me anything but African American. I have a history. My identity is rooted in that history. My parents gave me the knowledge of my own social identity, and my own experience in life has created that. I get to say who I am.
The second tenet, after self-reflection and ongoing lifelong learning and development, is this notion that we must mitigate the power imbalances, to recognize and mitigate the power imbalances that are inherent often in our clinician patient or clinician client or service provider community dynamics.
And then finally, the piece that I would offer that Jan and I feel people often either don't read or don't like, which is, and the institution has to model these principles as well.
Okay. So straight from their lips, those are the three major principles of cultural humility. And when they put this out in the 90s, and they wrote the seminal paper here, that they, it's literally titled Cultural Humility versus Cultural Competence. And this was about physician trainings and client settings. However, I feel that and have experienced that and seen that this kind of a stance is useful in work with clients if you're doing clinical work, in relationships with supervisees that we are training, in relationship to students we are teaching, and into research participants or communities we are studying. And certainly isn't just for physicians. And in fact, there's also an important point kind of beyond this, which is that, many people here, myself included, were kind of trained in this paradigm of like cultural competence. And I don't necessarily think the versus distinction is that helpful. To me, it's more of a both and I'll show you a bit more, and we can discuss that. But it's all about shifting away from trying to become only competent in every culture to more becoming humble, reflective, and active as a process. So it's relying less on group knowledge, let me have knowledge about this group, and more about what are processes that are going to undercut everything I do to be more inclusive and just. And again, to me, the marriage of all those things is really the sweet spot, that we can have really helpful knowledge and education about certain groups or conditions, especially, populations or people or issues that you're seeing a lot or you're working with in your setting. And we can also have a more culturally humble stance on the right, an equitable policy and process that underlies that work, ways that we attend to and minimize power imbalances, and critical self-reflection on our own experiences and how they're interacting with others. And that the two of these things together can culminate in a more ideal lifelong commitment to culturally conscious work. So many professional associations have been, in the last 5 to 10 years, starting to kind of recommend moving away from only cultural competence, such as the National Association of Social Workers, the APA and their multicultural guidelines that are their most recent version was published in 2017, the American Counseling Association, if we have any counselors or counseling psychologists. So really many organizations are saying, hey, this idea of cultural competence, was a really good shift from where we were. And it also has some limits because it kind of reifies this idea that we could somehow learn in a workshop or a training or a certificate program or a book all there is to know about a group of people. And of course, that's not true. And so it's kind of cultural humility encourages us to actually develop, again, some more processes that would help us with whomever we are working it with. And I don't think we need to throw out the cultural competence either. Understanding specific processes for groups you're working with is just as important. So help me understand what venues you might be thinking about this in. So this is a multiple choice answer for you. Answer in the chat. I'll do all that apply. What work are you currently doing? I'm going to open the chat here so I can see. A, clinical work. B, teaching. C, research. D, administration and leadership. E, policy and governance. These are the ones I could think of, actually. You might have an F here and you could fill in the blank, but please do enter all that you are doing right now. Okay, this is really helpful, helping me to kind of see where people are at. Okay. Somebody's saying everything. I'm doing it all. Great. Okay. And F, thank you. F, the fill-ins consultations. Okay, thank you. This is really useful. And I'm sure many of you are also training people. where I feel like this is also relevant with the people we train. So going to do a review of each of those cultural humility principles with a couple of examples and just some tools for you. So number one is the principle that we engage in lifelong learning and critical self-reflection, rather than relying on the idea that we could be an expert on a topic or group in a finite way. So, learning is a lifelong process as we continually explore our own places we come from, our lived experiences, how it informs our biases, our stereotypes, and how we might, be enacting those harmful biases onto others, our students, the clients, the participants, the people that are working for us, if you're a leader. And so critical in this process is recognizing our own unconscious or implicit biases we all have. Implicit biases are learned. They're not our fault. But we must be responsible for them. And we must be responsible for the harm they cause to others. I'm not going to click on this YouTube, but there's kind of a handy little YouTube video there that I like around that. So that unconscious bias are these lesser known ingrained thoughts that can kind of lead to errors when we make decisions about other people. And we're all going to have different ones in different ways. So being able to critically reflect on them is crucial and something we should practice, especially because study after study documents how much that unchecked or implicit bias is within all of us as providers, and furthermore, that it's harmful. So when we harbor negative views or beliefs that go unchecked, they come out against all kinds of groups, maybe even ones we belong to, because we've been taught negative messages about some of the groups we belong to. And so we eke that out on other people. There's a ton of literature on the fact that we as people in the world have our own stories we tell ourselves. We are biased whether we like it or not, and we do eke it out on other people, and we do harm. And so that cultural humility can continue to help us minimize that harm. So here are just some examples of how implicit bias or unconscious bias in the middle can cause harm. You see that it can, in a clinical setting, it has been shown to lead to worse communication in session, that clients are actually less satisfied and are less likely to trust what those providers are saying. Clients are less likely to follow recommendations when there's a lot of unconscious bias and harm. And the end result, then clients have worse health. So it is our responsibility to do something about them, because it's part of what we deliver, whether we're researchers, teachers, or clinicians or leaders. So there are many ways to critically self-reflect, which is a great thing. And you can use any of these methods. You might use some of these already, or you might have a different way that's not listed on here. You can do self-assessments about specific cultures or identities, populations. You could do a lot of readings, dive into someone who's talking about this and follow them in a social media way, read their blogs, look at infographics. You can consult with someone who's more experienced in these areas. You can do reflective writing. You can have culturally immersive experiences where you're kind of immersing yourself in some of the ongoings or activities of other cultures to learn more and see what that brings up for you. You can, in your work, whether it's teaching, clinical work, research, interactions, do some audio or videotaping and then get feedback on that. And again, you can do this in lots of modes. You can do it privately with a peer, in small groups, or go to a supervisor or role model. So there's lots of options, and you just need to find one or two that work for you and that provide you with critical feedback on what's going on. Cultural humility principle number 2 is to do whatever is within your power to recognize and change power imbalances in your work by using person-first language, acknowledging power differentials, and building in ways for people to participate more inclusively in whatever setting you're in. So this is the second principle of cultural humility, and I'll share with you kind of some ways that I know and teach to operationalize that. Learn processes you can do with every person and processes that will be unique for some specific people. These are examples I'll show you. Like, here's some examples of person first language, you know, moving away from using a condition as a noun, such as schizophrenics or psychotically depressed people. And instead, you know, saying these are people first with schizophrenia. These are people diagnosed with psychotic depression. Those are things you would want to do with everybody. And then there might be resources that will be specific to groups you care about. So I just have an example here. You know, there's resources in Northwest Arkansas for the Transgender Equality Network. If you are working with, teaching, studying, supporting people who are trans or non-binary, there are specific things you need to know about that group. Again, don't need to throw out this concept of being knowledgeable about different groups, but rather also developed processes that will underlie your interaction with everyone. So here's just another way to think about it. In Arkansas, we know a lot about hospitality. Be a good host. As you approach a research interaction, a supervision session with the trainee, a consultation with someone else, when you're preparing for a work situation, ask yourself, what are inclusive processes for anyone here on the left, and what would be inclusive processes for specific people on the right? So here's just some questions that I drafted, things that I am thinking of, whether I'm running a focus group for research participants, whether I'm hosting my chronic pain class for veterans at the VA, or whether I am teaching psychology interns at UAMS about cultural humility. No matter what I'm doing, I'm kind of thinking of processes for everybody that would be just good for everybody. And once I am aware of kind of the specific people that might be there, or even anticipating that, what are processes that would help them to participate and engage and be seen? So examples on the left might think about, in this activity, are there enough breaks for people who might need one for any number of reasons? People who are breastfeeding, people who have chronic pain, people who have attention deficit issues. Is there a place on this form I'm creating where people can list what they prefer to be called? Is there any content I'm about to share that's likely to be triggering or re-traumatizing for anybody? Do I have an option here for anonymous feedback about this thing? Anonymous. And are there multiple ways people could engage in this conversation? Those are some things that are good processes for everybody. And on the right, there's just some examples for specific people. Is there a way that people could take in this information if they were unable to see, if they were blind or had a visual impairment? Do I have gender neutral language here? Will this option that I'm creating allow people who use wheelchairs to participate? How would this thing I'm doing work for people without strong internet? You know, those are examples. These are just example questions of some of the ways that you can start to acknowledge power differentials and then try to minimize them. So you also might identify situations where there might be a power imbalance or bias, either with a colleague or by yourself, using a set of reflection questions. I have made a worksheet for you that has these questions on it. Ta-da, a special little treat. And this was adapted from some of the work out of the VA Office of Health Equity by a social psychologist named Leslie Hausman, who did a lot of work with primary care providers and staff on identifying their own unconscious biases. And that handout is in the chat. So I have kind of a worksheet that you could take for you and others on kind of reflection questions, if you're going to do this on your own or with a colleague, about kind of a work situation where you think something's coming up. So there's a tool. Now, our third and final principle, cultural humility, the one that Dr. Turmalon said, either people don't read or they don't like it. Advocate with or within institutions to help systems take accountability for changing unfair processes and policies. So we have a visual here. On the bottom is a picture of equality, and on the top is a visual of equality, and on the bottom is equity. So on the top is equality. We have 4 people who all get the same bike. And actually, if you look at this, there's a person using a wheelchair who can't even get on the bike. There's a really tall person who's on the bike but is hunched over and pretty uncomfortable. There's one person who's riding the bike comfortably. And then there's a child or a person who's very short who can't even reach the pedals. That's equality. That's giving everybody the same thing. When we have the same processes for everybody in our institution without any consideration of their unique needs, that is equality. And that's going to help maybe a couple people, but there are some people it will marginalize. And those people are usually already heavily marginalized by the structures in our world. Equity is at the bottom, where all those 4 people now have a bicycle tailored to their needs. The person with the wheelchair is riding the hand trike. The really tall person has a really big bicycle and they can ride. Everyone now has a system or a process that fits them and allows them to go on the bike ride. So if you want them to show up in your class and teach them, you want them to engage in research with you, you want to engage them in clinical work, you simply cannot have the same processes for all people. Now, that's not with everything all the time, like fairness in grading and things like that. And there are certainly a lot of policies and processes out there that are written in stone, or even just the way we do things, that disallow people from really participating and create more barriers to what we're trying to do. And so when you are thinking about kind of the broader social structure, this is a big visual, you don't need to take it all in, but you do need to think about the bigger picture. So kind of what most of us do is focused on psychosocial factors, this kind of box on the right, one element on this box on the right, and that's important. Well, our work, what we're trained to do as psychologists, is important. And we cannot neglect the fact that our clients, our trainees, our coworkers, our research participants and us are all functioning in this huge social complex web that has other determinants in it. On the left, you've got socioeconomic and political context. What are the economic policies of where they're living? What is the labor market for where they live? The housing situation. For example, in Arkansas, we're one of the only states with absolutely no protection for renters. So that changes what it is like to be a homeowner versus a home renter here. And people are more likely to have housing instability because of it, or live in polluted environments because of it. What are some of the public policies on education and health that exists where these people live? What are the cultural and societal values that they're told? And then how does that interact with some of their own identities and then affect their material circumstances, how they live and work, their conditions to play and get healthcare or not, their own biological and behavioral factors, and then of course their psychological factors. And then how does that interact with, this is the health system, but it could be your group practice or your college. And then ultimately, how does it impact their health and well-being? There's a lot to consider there. And so here are some questions that I find when I get overwhelmed, and I heard this in the last talk, someone saying, I feel so overwhelmed by all the problems. How do I get up and start the day with these things? Here are some questions to help you figure out your particular atmosphere of influence. Asking yourself, what are some of the social determinants that affect my own health and well-being? What are some of the social determinants that affect then these other people I'm working with? What are the institutions responsible for those things, those determinants? And what's an example? Let's get more and more narrow. What's an example of a policy or a process that's kind of operating unfairly in this institution toward me or toward these people I'm working with or for? And then asking yourself, what's within your power to influence this or change this? So you're really figuring out what are the problems, for who's responsible, and what can I do about it? And then what's not on here is you balancing your own capacity and ability to say, and am I going to then try to go do something about this? You can't take on every problem all the time, but you can take on some problems sometimes. Be ruthless with systems and be very kind to people. So that in the nutshell is kind of a snippet of cultural humility for those of you who it might be new to, and for those of you who have heard it but want to hear, a 20-minute overview of it. What we're about to do is an experiential exercise together. And before we start that, I do want to pause here for some questions, some comments, some lingerings that you're having in response to this. I'll just pause here for about 5 minutes and just stop sharing there. Anything on your mind, that you're kind of wondering after I shared that?
I have a quick question, Eva. In one of our previous presentations, we did breakout groups. In one of the breakout groups, we talked about some of the challenges that were involved in kind of having conversations about just all of this, like cultural humility, DEI, just the whole thing. And one of the barriers was like how kind of the fear of how people might respond because they're kind of taking it a certain way that over politicizes the conversation. So what has been, I mean, this may kind of be getting it off, but how do you kind of do the work of cultural humility and kind of encourage people to reflect and be like all of the three elements, but then I don't know, but then not
with the
get
interpersonal
caught up in
element.
that. Right.
I do get caught up in it.
Okay.
I'm all caught up in it because we're humans, like, and doing anything puts us out there, and so there are things that when I'm working on it don't go the way I plan, or it hurts me, and or I hurt others. That also happens, and so that's one tenet I have found that is helpful, to accept that, like, it's just like anything. It's just like setting up any process, getting a new job, creating a new department, like, or doing some kind of quality improvement. Like, we're about to some things are about to happen that are not going to feel good. And there's probably going to be some uncomfortable things, maybe some harmful things. Hope we're trying to minimize that, but that still happens. And just plan for that to happen, accept it. And so then when it comes, it's like, oh yeah, okay, this is important stuff. Like, this isn't going to feel really easy all the time. So that's just a mindset I have. But the actual in the moments, and I'm also now speaking not only on behalf of my own experience, but people I've watched who do this well. I'm also thinking of what I've seen is you got to pick the right time. Got to pick the right time. Is when there's a lot of distraction, or there's a lot of strain for some other reason in your sphere of influence, it might not be the right time to bring up something new, and you might have to wait on it. And also, what is this amazing quote that someone I really admire told me about this? You could work on it all, you just can't work on it all at once. So I also, and I truly really do narrow down to, like, okay, these are kind of the ways in which I'm going to work on this in my life, whether I'm readjusting something in my clinic, whether I'm working on doing this better, excuse me, my cat, working on doing this better in kind of the way I'm doing a research thing, my own teaching role that I also have. And usually I'm like, I can't do all the things in all the areas. I just one at a time. I just have to do one at a time. And also I feel like that preserves my ability to do it well. And it's more about quality over quantity. It's like I can't be hitting every item all the time, and neither can anyone in this Zoom room, and that I find then that also minimizes the experience I have seen go poorly a lot, where people are feeling like something is wrong and something needs to change, and there will be kind of an explosiveness about it all. And that's a valid feeling and a valid perspective. And sometimes it can leave the people who can do something about it with no clarity on where to go. And so kind of narrowing something and saying, this is my focus here. Like right now, my VA Research Center is looking for a new director. And I have the honor of being asked to be on the search committee. And so for 18 months, my focus in my work in that sphere is like, the thing I'm working on is figuring out how we can be more inclusive and equitable in our recruitment and our interview processes, both for the people we're trying to bring here, but also everyone who works here. This process needs to be transparent. It needs to give everyone equal access to this. And that happens bit by bit. Yes. That could say a lot more about that, but I
no, that's a big
want
topic.
to
That's something.
validate. I want to validate what you're talking about, because it's really tiring and sometimes can be a hotbed of things. I didn't say one other thing that's really important. Whenever you're in some type of environment and role and you have some privileges there, whether you're actually in charge, you're running the practice, let's say, you're running the classroom, no matter your identities, you have power by virtue of your position. But also when you have privileges from your identities, I identify as a white person, and that brings with it a certain level of privilege that then, even if something feels like a little risky for me or scary for me to do, it's probably going to go over okay. I'm probably going to be employed at the end of it. It's probably not that, what's our real proximity to danger? And, should I ask my colleague who's Black to be the one to go up and be the face of this thing? Or should that really be something that I can carry for her? And because she's already working on other things. This even happens when I coach with trainees, that they're like, oh, but we don't have any power. And I'm like, whoa. I'm looking at a sea of white people here who, and I know, because we've done some exercises, that almost all y'all came from like middle class or wealthy environments. Like, you have power. You need to accept that. And then you need to figure out how to move forward with that. That doesn't mean you need to oppress that on people, but you need to realize your positionality in relation to other people. And so that's something I would say, and again, not everyone needs, one person doesn't need to be doing everything. It's our collective responsibility to create systems and structures that work for all of us. So you just pick a time and a place that it's where it's going to probably work for you. You have the capacity, you're in that right position. I just didn't want to leave that last thought out. Any other kind of comments or wonderings? Okay, so we are going to do an exercise, and since there is about 15 of us, we'll just do it all together instead of breakout rooms. So I'm going to show you something. Get a piece of paper and a pen if you are able to write like that. If you, for some reason, are not able to write like that, then you'll be able to do this mentally for yourself. Let me show you. Okay. We're just going to do a brief experience based on the first principle of cultural humility to just do some self-reflection on our own lived experiences and positions. There's a lot of ways you can really do this deeply. And I find that extremely valuable, extremely valuable. I'm constantly learning new things about myself and my own assumptions, and it's valuable. And there's some pretty simple ways, and we're going to try one of those. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. What we're looking at here, I'm going to read this out loud for anyone who needs audio description, which is we're looking at kind of a circle, a wheel that's divided into different parts that have different domains of identity. You likely have done something like this before. And I am not going to call on people and ask you to identify yourself, although that might happen. I just want to let you know, I'm not going to do that. So you might disclose that of your own accord. So it's looking at domains kind of, I'm going to start where the 12 o'clock would be clockwise. What ethnicity do you identify with? What socioeconomic status do you identify with? That's kind of your wealth, your educational status. What's your gender identity? And also thinking about sex at birth, what's your sexual orientation and identity, what's your national origin, what's the first language you spoke in or used, what are any different physical abilities or developmental abilities or disabilities you might have, your age, your religious or spiritual affiliation, your race. So first, I'll just ask all of us to just jot those down as you go. And you don't need to worry about completing it. This is just kind of, getting the juices flowing, getting us in the exercise. So just take a few minutes and do that now. And then as you think about these identities for you, there's some questions here to further reflect on. Note to yourself, which are the identities you think about the most often? Which ones do you find yourself talking about the most, thinking about the most? Just to yourself. And now I'll ask you the inverse, and you can work ahead on the screen if you're seeing it. What are some of the identities that you think about the least often? As you even just kind of went through this list, and just kind of were jotting down mentally or on paper some of these different identities, which ones did you kind of had to think for a minute? Or which of those identities did you write down and you thought, I don't think about that a lot? Which are the identities you think about the least often? Then I'm going to skip on screen and ask you to think about which are the identities that have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself. Which of these identities have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself? Okay, and now pivot slightly. Last reflection question. Which of these identities do you feel has the greatest effect on how others perceive you? Which of these identities do you think have the greatest effect on how others perceive you? Okay. So now I just want to open this up. You're welcome to unmute. You're welcome to use the chat. We just spent 6 minutes doing this. What did you notice? What did you notice as you started, just kind of went through this exercise? Okay. Someone's sharing in the chat that they said that they think others perceive them in a different way than they view themselves. So that's a huge commonality that many people have. I'm sorry, commonality among who? Among many people, when we'll do these exercises and think about it, talk about that. And yes, how I kind of see myself and what I know about me is often different from how I find others perceive me. What else did you all notice?
I'm just going to share and not put it in the chat.
Yeah.
While there were several identifiers, this was still somewhat limiting. Because I thought of some other identifiers that I could have used to respond to the questions other than the options that were available.
That's a great point. Like, we are such multifaceted people. So you have even more identities that are coming up for you than what's listed on here.
Right.
That makes total sense. And I'm sure ways in which these identities intersect with each other, or have changed over time.
Correct. Because one identifier that was missing is our professional identity. And a comment was made earlier during the day about we identify as psychologists, we identify so much through our profession. And a lot of people, I don't think just psychologists, but just in terms of how others see us in the community, many times they relate to our professional identity, independently of
anything else,
ethnicity or. So that was another thought that I had. I was responding to the questions.
That makes a lot of sense, especially here, all of us in this space at this conference.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. One other common thing I hear that comes up for people is that, and that this is true for me, the identities that we often think about the most often tend to be the ones in which we feel or have experienced marginalization or discrimination. And the identities that we tend to think about the least often tend to be the ones that we aren't made to think about because they are in the majority or they hold positions of power in our settings. So this is a just absolutely brief, this is from, you can see at the bottom of the screen, this is from the Spectrum Center at the University of Michigan. There's a ton of kind of identity things like this. And just as one of the conference attendees shared, you can add your own, you can add, professional identity, or, I don't see citizenship status on here, for example. You can add other things. It's an example of just even how powerful it can be to do something, even, we've took 6 minutes to think about it, and then we've talked about it for about 3. That's about 9 minutes. But even if you're pressed on time, doing something like this 15 or 20 minutes can be a really great starting place. Or even if you've done this before, kind of doing it repeatedly in certain work environments where you're working as a psychologist, you're navigating what you're doing there. So this is just an example of that critical self-reflection. I'll just end on a recap, which is that the 3 principles of cultural humility: lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. One of the most wonderful things about cultural humility is the humility part, that there's, and Dr. Holmes, this goes back actually your question, like, how do we sometimes have these like interpersonal conversations, without them kind of becoming hotbeds of like polarizing things? It's like, it is absolutely the most normal thing to say, I haven't heard about this before. I don't know. I need to do some more research on that topic. That is the most, that's human nature. And then doing whatever's within our own power to change power imbalances in our work, to minimize them by being a good host and planning inclusive processes. And then advocating with or within institutions to help those systems take accountability for making more inclusive and just processes. Thank you so much for your presence and attention. It's so nice to be here with fellow psychologists in Arkansas. It's so enjoying it. And we're also recruiting for a postdoc right now in implementation science that could come work with me. You might take a screenshot of this or take a picture of it if you have someone in your life who might be interested. We focus on mental health services research and how to get more stuff out to more people. If you know of any people at that postdoc level who might be interested. And at the end of the slides that you have in your handout, I have like 9 more slides that's all for you. It's just, and it's not comprehensive, but it's just existing resources for continued lifelong learning and clinical practice. And I'd encourage you to either think about something you're doing in your own life and your work already, where you're already working on this and keep doing it. You might want to go to a different type of conference with this focus, or find a different, read a different journals or a set of articles that might bring some diversity of thought and perspective into your line of work. Or you might want to start, a critical self-reflection practice. I know all of those things have been invaluable for me. And there's a bunch of slides in the handouts that go with this chat, that go with this presentation, that are there for you to just find one thing. What is the next most elegant step for you? And I believe, are those handouts, did they go into the chat? I'm going to check that out now.
Yes, you mean the handouts that you submitted?
Yes. Oh, I see it. I see it. Thank you so much, Eric, for putting it in there. Okay. Yeah. I'm just going to put it in there. I'm just going to re-put it back in there.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah.
I got it. Because there's just a bunch of other slides here that don't need presenting, but here, I'll just show you as an example, like just a whole other section on existing resources for lifelong learning in this area, different things you can do. or use. Thank you all so much for your attention and for your engagement today. I so appreciate it, and I so appreciate all the great psychological work that's going on out there. The ways in which you are influencing the world. We make the world a better place. I'm just glad to be in commune with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Eva, so much for all of what you presented today. We appreciate that, allowing us to reflect and sharing experiences and knowledge and all of what you shared today. We appreciate it. Thank you for putting your slides and handouts. So people, for those that are attending, you can just click on those links and then you can be able to continue to refer to this information. Eric did put the link for the evaluation in the chat as well. So please click on that and do the evaluation. For those of you that are still on, please put your name in the chat. That'll let us know that you were here throughout the entirety of the presentation. And that's our way of taking attendance. Thank you for everybody today for all of your time and attention. We had just a power-packed just slate of speakers today, and Eva, you definitely added to that. So it's much appreciated. You helped to close us out in a strong way. So this is the end of our first day of our conference. And everyone, we're going to pick up tomorrow, start at 9 o'clock, and tomorrow is going to focus more on the role of media, social media, and technology, and as we move forward in psychology. So Eva, today we kind of focused on DEI, and tomorrow is about technology.
I saw that in the advertisement that one of the main speakers tomorrow, I always forget how to pronounce her name, Dr. Beth Prusacic. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's an implementation scientist too. We know each other from our research world. I have been to this talk she's doing for y'all tomorrow. 10 out of 10. She's a journalist turned psychologist. And like, if you have any interest in social media, this person not only knows how to do it, what thinking about it and real tips, but also kind of thoughts on like how to make it manageable. It's really stand out. I'm excited. It's going to be
that's
fun.
awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you for that. Yeah, give us all something to definitely look forward to. Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you again, everybody today. Any last comments, Eva, that you would like to?
No, thank you for having me. Thanks for doing the work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Please enjoy your evening, and we'll see you back tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. We may stay on just for a few minutes so people can put their name in the chat as we're closing out. And then so you can also click on the link for the